In 1987, I was not always doing what I'm doing now. I used to be a PR guy, and now I'm a recovering publicist. In 1987, I was on a team that launched something called PowerPoint, and I'd like to ask you all to forgive me right now for that, because I tell stories. When I was a PR guy, I told stories. When I didn't have my homework ready in high school, I told stories. And now what I've been doing since 2005 is talking to people all over the world about social media. I've interviewed a little over 400 people in 41 countries. Mostly I've talked to them about their work, but sometimes I talk about other things and other ways that social media plays in. When I wrote Making Conversations with Robert Scoble in 2005, the real issue that we were trying to talk about was the excesses of traditional marketing. That there was an entrenched best practice of sticking messages into people's foreheads, even though people didn't want them stuck there. The world changed in 3 years, and the book that I just completed 2 Fridays ago, Twitterville, is really about the efficiency of a new form of marketing. The old marketing we call broadcast marketing, and the new one we call conversational marketing, and the new age we call conversational age. I want to stop for a minute before I do this slide. I want to introduce you to a couple of people. First is my editor, my inspiration, my wife, Shel Israel. Next to her is the mother of Palmer. I frequently call her the evil mother-in-law, but she's very special. Her name is Jean Vernon. A few days from now, she'll be 88 years old. A few weeks ago, she had her second hip transplant, which obviously went rather well. The first time around, when she had a hip transplant, we took her to Hawaii, but times have changed for her, so this time we brought her to see me speak. I want to point out what I just did. I just told you a whole bunch of things about me that are personal while I'm standing in front of a business conference. The point is that if you're thinking about using social media in a business sort of way, it frequently starts with silly things like what you had for lunch, what the weather is. Nice plus, did you get that at Nordstrom's? You very rarely just start talking about business. And that brings me to Twitter. I call it Twitterville because it is very much like a very, very large small town. Frank Eliason said 30 million, that's higher than the numbers I've heard, but I'll take it. But yet, it's a place where you talk about nice weather, nice lunch, and sometimes that's all you do is talk about that. You get bored, you move on. The idea for Twitterville came from a couple of ways. What has happened now is we can find people to talk with all over the world. There are times when we organize into neighborhoods, and they're very strong and they're very topical. And we share interests. Sometimes it's business, and sometimes it's something else. Here I am at a business conference. I'm in front of several hundred business-oriented people. I've just written a book about Twitter and business, and I've been asked to speak about anything but business. Thanks, producers. It's okay, because some of the best stories that I came across in this book really has to do with other things, and the lessons I learned in it really do apply to business. James Buck is a 19-year-old, well, now he's 20, graduate student at UC Berkeley. His major is journalism, his specialty is photojournalism, and to do his graduate paper, or graduate project, he went to Egypt, into the Nile Delta area, in April of 2008 to cover the food stocks. 2 weeks before he went over there, a friend of his at UC Berkeley said it gets kind of weird in Egypt. So there's a program we want you to put on your BlackBerry. It's called Twitter, and if you get into any trouble, let us know and maybe we can help you. James got into some trouble. Although he used a telephoto lens and stayed away from what became a riot, he was picked up by police, thrown in the back of a car, taken off to a holding cell. He was not handcuffed, but he was very carefully guarded, but they didn't seem to mind when he whipped out his BlackBerry and typed a single word tweet. That word was arrested. I never met James Buck, never heard of him. The fact is he only had 92 followers at the time that this happened. But those 92 followers each retweeted what he had said and what was going on. And the story moved very, very quickly. One of the people who caught this was connected to somebody who's in the State House who doesn't tweet. He used an old-fashioned convenience. It's called a telephone. It's very quick. You can actually talk real time on those things. It's amazing. And one thing led to another, and the State Department acted with uncharacteristic speed. 27 hours later, James was back in the same car. He was about to get a free ride back to California, courtesy of our government. And he tweeted the second one-word tweet, and that was free. By the time he came back to California, mainstream media was all over this story. He was interviewed on television. He really didn't want a whole lot of that. But he had become famous. Yanis Kroms is a Latvian citizen who moved to the United States to be an entrepreneur. He's 23 years old, being unfunded, self-funded. Yanis decided to go to this conference. He was staying in New Jersey, which is a lot cheaper than Midtown Manhattan. He took the Hudson River ferry over, did his business, and on his way back, a funny thing happened. US Air 1549 landed 2 football fields away from him. He took this picture with his iPhone. He put it up on something that was less than 30 days old called TwitPics. And so if you went to Yanis Kroms on Twitter, you could click once more and see this photo. Somebody asked to borrow his iPhone, and that's the mystery part, because he didn't even pay attention to him. He handed him the iPhone and started walking away. Yanis got involved in helping the flight attendant who had 2 legs broken. He got into the cold water, he brought her up, he helped plant her into a beach chair, and then he got his iPhone back, and as the phone was handed to him, it was ringing. It was MSNBC News. And people all over the world who are watching MSNBC are seeing this photo 27 minutes after the incident, after the photo was taken. And he's being live interviewed on 3 continents while standing on the ferry. And here's a guy who didn't really want to be a citizen journalist. He just wanted to save a few bucks and stay in New Jersey. But at this point, I think something happened. Until now, most of traditional media looked at social media and our form of citizen journalism with trepidation, disdain, a lot of not necessarily nice things. They had been coming into social media, particularly Twitter, not to learn, not to get information, but to get messages out. Hey, come to CNN, read us. Come to the New York Times, read what we have. What happened at this point is the media, the traditional media, who has been less and less adept at getting stories anywhere because they've been cutting back and cutting back and cutting back. The stringers they used to have are gone. The junior reporters have replaced the senior reporters. The sources of information are drying up. And all of a sudden, you got an earthquake, you got in between this Mumbai, Gaza. You have some kid who wants to get to New Jersey breaking a story that if the Pulitzer Prize people do not consider an iPhone photo for next year's award, I'll eat my hat. And all of a sudden, the press, and I do mean all of a sudden, seems to have changed the view of Twitter and all of that. They started realizing we're the speed on the street. We're the sources of information. We're the access to the things that are happening in the street corners of the world. And that's one hell of a global neighborhood. I'm told that most of what's on here. But on a very large scale, I would argue that global neighborhoods is a fundamental change of social media. It is the change that means that without government intervention, without all the institutional interventions that we know about, we can talk to each other. I have a great habit. I use Google Translate, and I talk to people in China, Japan, in Egypt, where I have a few friends, in Israel, and other places. Sometimes, especially with the Chinese, my translations get goofy, but that will get better. And that means that everybody in business, in life, can find people who share a common interest with them. And they can do it without intervention through whatever neighborhoods they choose to join. Thank you very much.